Hey everybody, it's Nathan Selove with another edition of Autism Actually Speaking. Today I want to talk about a topic that I've been thinking about doing for a while, and I've been seeing a lot of comments about it lately, so here goes. Let's talk about internalized ableism. So in this video, I'm going to lay out what internalized ableism is, why it happens, and how we can fight against it. First off, what is internalized ableism? Why isn't my camera answering the question? Internalized ableism is when someone with a disability has heard so many ableist things in society that they've gotten to the point where they start saying it to themselves or to other people with disabilities. You can probably see why that would be a problem. One example of this from my own life is when I received challenges for my right of access because I have a service dog. Although I know that I'm in the right when I tell someone, no, I can bring my service dog in here and I need them for my disability, there's still a little voice inside me that says, Nathan, you're imposing on everybody. Nathan, you're making a ruckus. Nathan, if you could just control your sensory levels by yourself, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. And that voice can be very powerful. And I've also talked to people with other disabilities that have similar experiences. For example, I've sometimes talked to people who use wheelchairs that sometimes encounter this voice when it comes to establishments that do not have wheelchair access. This makes it hard for them to advocate for themselves because they feel like they're just causing a ruckus if they say something. Sometimes this internalized ableism even leads those of us with disabilities to the point where we refuse certain accommodations that we know that we need just because of that voice. I will sometimes be in instances where I'm in a very crowded area and my sensory levels are starting to get really bad, and someone that knows that I'm autistic will even ask me, do you need to get out of here? Is this too much for you? And even though I know I should say, yes, this is too much for me, get me out of here, I don't want to impose, so I sometimes just say, no, I can take it. So where does this come from? Why do people feel internalized ableism? This happens because people are often a reflection of society. A person's personality and self-concept usually is directly linked to their culture. This comes from the fact that we live in an ableist society that at best views disability through a medical model lens, so it rejects the notion that disability is a form of marginalization, or at worst, views it through a moral model lens, so it's a reflection of a person's moral character. And because we live in a society that views disability as being the problem rather than the society that lacks accommodations for the disability as being the problem, when those of us with disabilities encounter access barriers, we're inclined to think of ourselves as being the problem because we're the ones with the disability rather than the access barrier itself. So how do we solve this? Well, there are a few solutions that I'd like to discuss. First off, and this is something that I've talked about on my channel before, we need to embrace a social model of disability. What this means is that when someone encounters an access barrier, whether it be a business telling someone they can't bring their service dog in there, or a restaurant that does not have wheelchair access, or a school that doesn't properly accommodate its students, that is not a lack of access to something medical. That is a form of oppression. The problem is not with the disability. The problem is with the fact that we live in an able-normative, neuronormative society that views the able-bodied and the able-minded as being the neutral, and therefore does not take into account the needs of people with disabilities when constructing buildings, organizing events, or even creating society. I have often said that the moral fiber of a society is measured based on how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. But when the structure of the society itself is what makes the citizens vulnerable in the first place, that should be seen as a greater moral failing. And the fact that it's seeped into the minds of those of us with disabilities is disheartening. But it doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes the biggest enemy of those of us with disabilities is that internal voice that tells us you're not worthy of accommodation. You're a burden to society and you're imposing yourself on other people. And it's a difficult voice. It's hard to turn off. And I understand that sometimes it is difficult to advocate for yourself. I've found that it's easier to advocate for other people. But that can be part of the solution. If we create a community, a sense of community, and expand that to every single person with a disability, then anytime a person encounters an access barrier, they will know, we will know, that there is a community behind us, that there are activists and advocates that stand with us to demand that we create a world that is accessible to us, a world that we can live in, a world that we can enjoy. And maybe we'll never fully get rid of that voice, but perhaps we can drown it out. If we surround ourselves with a community of activists and advocates, both in our physical life and through social media, maybe we can drown out that voice while everyone around us is telling us, you are worthy of accommodation. You are not a burden on society. You are not imposing yourself on society. You deserve to live in a world that gives you equity, that gives you access, and gives you the ability to have a life that's as rich as anybody else. You are worthy of that. Never forget that. Well, that's today's video. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this episode, please give it a like, a share, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Check out some of my other stuff. And if you want to support the channel in other ways, support me on Patreon. In the meantime, if you have any questions or topics you'd like addressed, please leave them in the comments below or message me on my Facebook, also linked below. And remember, if you critique the continuity of child cartoons in a passionate manner, you might be autistic.